As mentioned earlier, here in Washington, thousands of veterans, laid-off federal workers, and others rallied on the National Mall Friday. The crowd protesting mass federal layoffs instigated by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and what they call unconstitutional actions by the White House, including dismantling agencies, proposed cuts to Social Security, and reductions in health care services. Two federal judges have ordered Donald Trump's administration to rehire thousands of probationary workers who were let go in mass firings across multiple agencies. The decisions slow down, for now, the president's dramatic downsizing of the U.S. federal government. The judges, one in Maryland and the other in California, found legal problems with the way the mass terminations were carried out. And they ordered the employees, at least temporarily, brought back on the job. With us now to discuss Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs and other developments in Washington this week is Matthew Wilson, Associate Professor of Political Science at Southern Methodist University. Welcome to the show. Great having you. And how effective do you think DOGE has been so far in fulfilling its mission?
Well, it certainly has gone beyond even what I think most people who voted for Donald Trump expected to happen. In that sense, it's been very effective, but it hasn't always been detail-oriented, and in many cases has run up against considerable opposition, including opposition in the courts. Some of the things that DOGE has done are frankly illegal. Certainly, they're broadly complying with the mandate that Trump voters wanted them to have of reducing the size of the federal government, but the methods and the process by which they're doing it, I think definitely have generated considerable blowback from the courts.
Yeah, and looking at the wider picture, there seems to be a tug of war between the president and the Department of Justice. How do you think this will play out?
Well, with regard to the Department of Justice, the president made a remarkable speech today at the DOJ, talking about his desire to end weaponization of the Justice Department, airing his grievances about the way that the Justice Department went after him, he says, during the previous administration, but then raising some concerns that turnabout might be fair play. And I think that what we'll have to wait and see is whether he, in fact, tries to use the Justice Department to go after political adversaries. So, that would be the concern. He, of course, has really overhauled leadership at the Justice Department. I mean, having Pam Bondi as Attorney General, Kash Patel in charge of the FBI is a significant departure from what we've seen before. And we'll see going forward how they use those powers with regard to people that Donald Trump disagrees with, Democrats, left-leaning media, et cetera.
And I'd like to get a sense if you have an idea of which are the key agencies that you see as targets of DOGE in the future.
Well, with regard to DOGE, I think definitely the Department of Education. We know there are going to be tremendous reductions in staffing and personnel and mission at the Department of Education. We'll likely see some reductions at places like the Department of Labor. Probably personnel reductions at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Energy. So I think a lot of those departments, particularly that are regarded as perhaps outside of the core functions of the government, that is, the core cabinet departments being things like the Department of Defense, Department of the Treasury, et cetera, those will probably get less reduction, not to say none, but they will probably get less reduction than we'll see in something like the Department of Education, which Donald Trump honestly doesn't believe should exist in the first place.
Matthew, at the same time, we have staffers, contractors, and a whole economy that affects millions indirectly, right? Beyond the strictly speaking staff federal employees. How do you see these in electoral terms?
Yeah, this is a huge question because significant cuts to federal government affect not only direct federal employees, but as you say, contractors and entities like universities, for example, that really rely on federal grants to fund basic research. So there are going to be ripple effects through the economy, no doubt. And by the way, not only in the United States, but also for contractors abroad that have had partnerships with USAID, with the State Department, et cetera, many of whom are now scrambling or just frankly out of a job. So there will be economic ripple effects certainly in the United States, but also overseas. And I think electorally, this is going to be tough for Republicans in the short term. I think, for example, it really hurts Republican electoral prospects in the Virginia elections this fall because so many federal employees live in Northern Virginia. And we know that off-year elections are tough for the incumbent party under the best of circumstances. When you have a lot of the economic disruptions created by tariffs and by DOGE's reductions in staffing of the federal government, it could be a rough go for Republicans in the midterms and in this year's off-year elections.
And much of what we're discussing, right, revolves around the disruption of Elon Musk and his appearance on the U.S. and international political stage. How do you see that, especially internationally?
Well, I think Elon Musk is not popular internationally. I think that's pretty clear. Now, I mean, to be sure, that doesn't mean that what he's doing is wrong, but it certainly is not playing well in a lot of among a lot of America's allies. There certainly has been tremendous blowback in places like Canada, Western Europe, against not only Musk's activities, but more broadly, the seeming strategic recalibrations of the Trump administration. So, we've seen Tesla dealerships attacked in Europe, for example, which is obviously a sign of displeasure at Elon Musk. So I think that Elon Musk is of questionable popularity in the United States, but pretty much unquestionably unpopular in most of America's allies abroad.
And talking about the allies abroad and the greater, alliances like NATO, the old, probably traditional alliances, partnerships the U.S. had, how do you see that shifting under the current administration?
Well, I think that's a very big question. I think that clearly the Europeans are inclined, and perhaps they feel forced, to take on more responsibility for their own defense. This is something that American presidents have been calling for going all the way back to Bill Clinton. So Donald Trump is not new or unique in this regard. And so this is a positive thing from the American standpoint to see the Europeans take on a greater burden share in terms of the Western alliance. However, what's troubling is if they're doing it because they feel they can no longer trust the United States. That does long-term damage to America's credibility as a global actor if that's the case. So I do think that we'll have to see ultimately how the Ukraine situation is resolved, and how that is ultimately resolved will go a long way to assessing the health of the NATO alliance and the transatlantic partnership moving forward.
Matthew Wilson, thank you. Great having you.
Thank you.